Elias Kade's eyes fluttered open to a sterile, humming quiet that was both alien and terrifying. The air was cold, biting at his skin despite the thin hospital gown wrapped loosely around his frame. Above him, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, their harsh glare casting stark shadows on the pale walls. He tried to move, but his limbs felt like lead, unresponsive and fragmented, as if the very fabric of his body had frayed. A sudden flicker caught his gaze. Shadows, unmoored from their usual anchors, danced silently on the walls. They twisted and writhed, grotesque and unnatural, as if mocking the fragile state he now occupied. Panic surged, but his mind was caught in a liminal space between consciousness and oblivion. "Elias," a voice whispered, breaking the oppressive silence. He turned his head with effort to see Mira Voss standing nearby, her sharp eyes softened by worry. "You're awake." Her presence was an anchor in the disorienting haze. Mira's short, cropped hair framed a face hardened by experience yet open with empathy, a beacon amid the creeping shadows. She pulled a chair close, fingers trembling slightly as she manipulated a holographic interface, streams of encrypted data cascading before her. "Your shadow." "Elias," she said carefully, "it's not just rogue. It killed you." The words hit like a blow. Kade's mind grappled with the impossible truth. His own shadow, his most intimate reflection, had turned predator, extinguishing the man who had chased these spectral criminals for so long. He was trapped between life and death, a ghost in his own body. Outside the safe house's dim neon glow, the city roiled with chaos. Rogue shadows slipped through rain-slicked alleys, their formless shapes warping beneath flickering streetlights, silent hunters without bodies. Elias and Mira moved cautiously, every sense heightened. The oppressive wetness seeped into their bones, the echo of footsteps a relentless reminder of the ever-present threat. "We were not just dealing with random detachment anymore," Mira whispered. "Umbra's grip is tightening. They want to finish what they started, make sure no one survives to expose them." Elias nodded, the weight of betrayal heavy on his shoulders. His mind spiraled through fractured reflections, memories splintered like the shards of a broken mirror he once stared into in his apartment. His shadow's absence was a constant void, a black mark on his fractured identity. In the growing darkness of the city, Elias realized that reclaiming his shadow was not just a matter of survival, it was a desperate attempt to salvage what remained of his soul. Yet with every step he took, the boundary between self and shadow blurred further, threatening to consume him utterly. Beneath the city's neon-lit veneer, where the pulse of power throbbed like a malignant heartbeat, Elias, Kade and Mira Voss stood at the threshold of Umbra's labyrinthine core. The descent was not merely physical, but symbolic, a journey into the veins of corruption that nourished the shadow rebellion. The air grew heavier as they navigated a narrow stairwell, the cold metal rails slicked beneath their fingers, echoes of their footsteps swallowed by humming machinery and distant, muffled conversations. The underground facility sprawled like a hive of clandestine activity. Walls were adorned with flickering screens, each displaying cryptic data streams and live feeds of shadows darting through the city's veins. The faint glow cast harsh angles across Elias's worn trench coat, his angular features etched with exhaustion and grim determination. Beside him, Mira's piercing gaze scanned every detail, her fingers twitching with restrained impatience. Here, in this mechanical underworld, the city's true heartbeat was exposed, a network of control, manipulation, and silent war. "This is worse than we imagined," Mira murmured, her voice barely above a whisper as they approached a central console cluttered with encrypted files and schematics. "Umbra isn't just orchestrating shadow attacks, they're weaponizing fear itself." Elias nodded, his mind racing to piece together the implications. The shadows, once ethereal extensions of the self, had become instruments of chaos, puppets in a game played by faceless elites. But who orchestrated this symphony of darkness? The answer, he feared, lay deeper than any shadow could reach. Their investigation led them to a cluttered laboratory, a sanctuary of scientific obsession hidden from the world above. Here, Drede, Leonard Huxley awaited, his disheveled appearance a stark contrast to the sterile precision of his surroundings. Tubes, wires, and arcane devices cluttered the space. But it was the strange device clutched in his trembling hands that drew Elias's attention, a tool designed to track the elusive movements of the detached shadows. Huxley's eyes flickered with a manic intensity as he greeted them. "Detective Kade, Mira," he began, voice a brittle blend of hope and fear. "You don't understand the forces at play. Umbra's reach is vast, and what you see is just the surface." Elias studied the scientist carefully, noting the subtle tremor in his hands and the haunted look behind his wild eyes. "Are you with Umbra, or against them?" Elias demanded, his tone sharp but controlled. Huxley hesitated, then sighed deeply. "I'm a prisoner of my own creation, caught between redemption and ruin, the shadows. They are both a curse and a key. Umbra exploits them for power, but there's more to their detachment than mere weaponization." Mira exchanged a glance with Elias, uncertainty clouding her features. The scientist's ambiguous allegiance complicated their mission, forcing a delicate balance between trust and skepticism. As they pressed deeper, Elias intercepted a clandestine meeting of Umbra operatives. Faces obscured by shifting shadows, voices laced with conspiracy. Discussions of power plays, betrayals, and the looming shadow rebellion echoed through the chamber. Elias's heart pounded, the weight of betrayal settling like a stone in his gut. Here, in the dim glow of secrecy, the true scope of Umbra's ambitions was laid bare. Returning to his apartment, Elias found no solace. The cracked mirror before him fractured his reflection, mirroring the turmoil within. Neon lights from the city outside cast elongated, pulsing shadows that seemed alive, mocking, menacing. Alone he grappled with the duality that had defined his existence, enforcer and victim, hunter and hunted, man and shadow. His thoughts spiraled, haunted by the knowledge that reclaiming control might exact a cost greater than he dared imagine. Yet, despite the dread and fractured resolve, a steely determination anchored him. The city's fate, and perhaps his own, hinged on the choices forged in the crucible of this veiled underworld. The shadows were no longer mere silhouettes in the dark. They were the veins through which power and corruption flowed, and Elias Kade was ready to uncover every secret, no matter the price. "We have to move fast," Mira urged, eyes flickering to the encrypted data scrolling across her holo pad. "Umbra's fractures mean they're vulnerable, but if we hesitate, they'll tighten their grip again." Elias's gaze hardened. "Then we press forward. No more shadows to hide behind." But as the city's heartbeat pulsed beneath them, one question lingered. Could he reclaim not only the city, but the fractured pieces of himself before the shadows consumed them both? The hunt was far from over. The city was breaking apart. Neon signs flickered erratically, casting fractured pools of light onto the cracked pavement slick with rain and spilled oil. Elias Kade moved through the streets like a ghost himself, his trench coat clinging damply to his angular frame. Each step echoed hollowly, swallowed quickly by the cacophony of sirens, distant screams, and the restless murmur of a city on the edge of collapse. Around him, shadows flitted with unnatural autonomy, silent, predatory, and chaotic. No longer mere extensions of their owners, these dark entities slipped along walls and darted between alleyways, their movements jagged and erratic. The air thrummed with the metallic tang of ozone and the acrid smoke of burning electronics. Neon advertisements, once vibrant beacons, now sputtered, their colors bleeding into one another like wet ink, mirroring the city's unraveling. Beside him, Mira Voss's expression was a mask of tense concentration. Her fingers danced across a portable holo interface, streams of encrypted data cascading down translucent panels. The cold blue glow illuminated her short-cropped hair and sharp features, eyes bright with grim determination, despite the exhaustion shadowing them. "Umbra's moving faster," she murmured, voice barely audible over the distant rumble of destruction. "They're coordinating strikes across multiple districts. It's no longer random, this is an orchestrated rebellion." Elias's jaw tightened. "We need to cut their control nodes." Disrupt the network before it spreads out of control. Mara nodded, tapping rapidly to bring up schematics of the city's underbelly. There. 3 major data hubs they were using to command the shadows. If we can take those offline, we might buy some time. The pair slipped through the fractured cityscape, moving with practiced stealth amid the chaos. Buildings groaned under the weight of neglect and violence, glass shattering like crystalline rain with every distant explosion. Shadows writhed along walls and underfoot, their shapes shifting grotesquely as if mocking the fragility of the human forms they once mirrored. As they approached the first node, Elias felt a chill crawl along his spine. His own shadow lingered unnaturally long beside him, twitching like a living thing on the verge of rebellion. He shook off the unease, focusing instead on the task at hand. "Cover me," he commanded, drawing a compact pulse weapon calibrated to disrupt shadow energy. Mira nodded, fingers poised over her hacking interface. "Go. I'll handle their security protocols." The entry was guarded by a flickering barrier of shadow and light, a warped liminal space where forms twisted and dissolved. Elias fired precise bursts, each pulse unraveling tendrils of darkness that writhed and hissed. The shadows recoiled, but the barrier held. "Mara," Elias called, voice taut. "It's stronger than I thought. Give me a moment. I'm bypassing their firewalls." The tension was palpable, the air thick with the scent of burning circuitry and damp concrete. Outside, the city convulsed with sporadic eruptions of violence, shadows materializing into grotesque shapes to assault fleeing citizens and law enforcement alike. Suddenly, a deafening explosion rocked the street behind them. Elias spun, catching a glimpse of a collapsing neon sign raining sparks and glass. The acrid smell of smoke burned his nostrils as he shielded Mira instinctively. "We re-exposed," he growled, eyes scanning for threats. Shadows surged forward, their forms morphing into snarling beasts with glowing eyes. Elias's pulse weapon flared, carving arcs of light through the darkness as Mira continued her frantic hacking. "Almost there," she panted. One more second with a final keystroke, the barrier flickered and dissolved. The control node's core blinked erratically before powering down in a cascade of sparks. Relief was short-lived as alarms wailed. Umbra's retaliation was swift. They raced to the next node, the streets now a battleground where light and shadow clashed violently. Elias's mind flashed to the city's neon glow, the fractured cityscape reflecting not just physical destruction, but the shattering of order, identity, and control. Their path was blocked by a massive shadow entity, a pulsating mass of darkness that seemed to absorb the faint city light. Elias drew in a breath, heart pounding, and stepped forward. "This ends tonight," he whispered, voice steady despite the dread coiling in his gut. The entity twisted, shifting as if acknowledging his presence. The line between Elias and his own shadow blurred in that moment, a battle not only for the city's survival, but for the fragile boundary between self and the darkness lurking within. The rain began again, cold and insistent, washing the city in a blur of neon and shadow. The fractured city waited with bated breath, teetering on the knife's edge between salvation and oblivion. And Elias Kade was ready to fight for every flicker of light left in the darkness. The edge of sanity, the city never truly slept, but for Elias Kade, the nights grew longer and darker than ever before. In the suffocating silence of his apartment, the neon glow of the megacity blood through cracked blinds, casting fractured light across peeling walls and a floor cluttered with files and empty bottles. His trench coat hung limply on a chair, a worn armor now heavy with exhaustion. Eyes sunken and shadowed, Elias sat rigid, fists clenched on his knees, staring at the flickering silhouette that stretched unnaturally across the room. His shadow. It was no longer a mere absence of light, but a living, taunting presence. Tonight it writhed and twisted on the cracked plaster, elongating into grotesque shapes, a clawed hand reaching, a snarling maw gaping wide. Whispered voices emerged from its shifting edges, voices that were at once his own and utterly alien. They spoke of failure, betrayal, and the inescapable darkness lurking beneath his skin. You can't hold on, the shadow hissed, its voice a dry rasp in the still air. You are nothing without me, and yet I am everything you fear. Elias' breath hitched. He fought to suppress the tremor that threatened to unravel him. Control, that fragile illusion he had clung to throughout his career, was slipping through his fingers like smoke. The duality he had always wrestled with was no longer theoretical. It was a living nightmare clawing at his mind. A sharp knock shattered the oppressive quiet. Elias. Mira Voss' voice was tentative but steady as she stepped inside, her short-cropped hair damp from the rain outside. Her piercing gaze swept over the disarray, settling on him with concern. You need to come in. Umbra just made a move. He managed a hollow nod, rising unsteadily. The walk to the precinct was a blur, the city's neon veins pulsing with an indifferent rhythm. The hum of distant machinery, and the ever-present haze pressing in on his senses. At the station, amidst the buzz of urgent voices and flickering holo screens, Mira laid out the latest data. Umbra's operatives had infiltrated deeper than previously suspected, orchestrating shadow attacks with ruthless precision. Elias's gaze drifted to the corner of the room where a flicker caught his eye. For a split second, his shadow stretched beyond the confines of his body, flickering like a sinister spectre. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled. Was it merely fatigue, or was the boundary between him and his shadow truly dissolving? Yuri slipping, Mira whispered, stepping closer. You need to hold on. We need you. He wanted to believe her. Wanted to grasp the fraying threads of his sanity before they snapped. But every time he closed his eyes, the shadow came alive in his mind's eye, speaking in that cruel, mocking tone. Later that night, under the relentless drizzle of rain, Elias sat in a cramped car on an empty street, Mira beside him tapping furiously on a portable console. Their stakeout was silent except for the rhythmic patter of rain against the windshield and the distant sirens weaving through the maze of alleys. Elias's gaze flickered to the rearview mirror. The shadow behind him, or what should have been his shadow, detached briefly, flickering like a living void. His heart hammered. The hunter had become the hunted. Back in his apartment, the nightmare deepened. The shadow spoke again, its voice now unmistakably his own, distorted and cruel. You cannot win. You are fractured, a broken man chasing ghosts. Let me consume you and be whole again. Elias shook, the oppressive darkness pulsing around him, as if the room itself breathed with malevolent intent. He fought to push back the despair, to reclaim the part of himself that still clung to hope and control. Mara's voice broke through, steady and insistent. Fight it, Elias. You are more than this. But the edge of sanity was perilously close, and the shadows were waiting, patient and hungry, to claim what was theirs. The battle for Elias's mind had begun, a desperate struggle between light and darkness, self and shadow, control and chaos. And in the depths of that war, the city watched, indifferent and unyielding. The precinct was unusually quiet for the hour, the hum of computers and the occasional tap of keys punctuating a tense atmosphere. Elias Kade sat rigidly in the interrogation room, the stale air heavy with anticipation. Before him, Agent Klein sat composed, his uniform immaculate yet somehow ill-fitting to the man's cold, calculating gaze. The stark, fluorescent light overhead flickered, casting sharp, moving shadows that seemed to taunt the very man who had been hunting shadows for months. You've been playing a dangerous game, Klein, Elias said, voice low but firm. Sabotaging investigations, feeding information to Umbra. Why? Klein smiled thinly, the expression devoid of warmth. You think you're the only one trying to control the uncontrollable. Umbra understands power in ways you never will. Elias leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You re-betraying your own. This city's on the brink, and you re-pushing it over the edge. Klein's eyes flickered briefly with something almost human before hardening again. Survival requires sacrifice. You will see that soon enough. Shadows are no longer just reflections, they're weapons. Across the precinct, in a cramped but technologically dense office, Mira Voss worked feverishly. The glow of holographic screens illuminated her face, casting neon blues and greens that danced with every rapid keystroke. She hacked through layers of encryption, the complexity of Umbra's communications both a challenge and a revelation. "Elias," she called softly into her comlink, "you need to see this. Umbra isn't just orchestrating the shadow rebellions, they're re-weaponizing the shadows. It's worse than we thought." The message sent a shiver through the detective's spine. Shadow weaponization meant mass destruction, control on a scale previously unimagined. The shadows that once detached sporadically were now being engineered to serve as instruments of terror. Suddenly, the precinct plunged into darkness. The power cut was immediate, a suffocating silence broken only by the flicker of emergency lights. Shadows writhed unnaturally on the walls, elongated and distorted, as if mocking the helplessness of those trapped within. "Sabotage," Elias muttered from the inside. He reached for his Saddam, moving cautiously through the dim corridors with Mira close behind. Every sound was amplified, the distant clatter of a dropped baton, the faint whisper of movement. Paranoia coiled tight around them, the knowledge that betrayal lurked in every shadow. Their path led them to the rooftop of one of the city's towering skyscrapers. Rain slicked the surface, reflecting the chaotic neon glow of the megacity below. Distant sirens wailed, a mournful chorus underscoring the enormity of their discovery. "We're up against more than just rogue shadows," Mira said, voice trembling slightly but resolute. "Umbra's web is tangled deep in every corner of this city." Elias gazed out over the labyrinthine cityscape, light and darkness entwined in a perpetual dance. The corruption, the control, the loss they had witnessed all converged here. "Then we cut the web," he said. "No matter the cost." As the rain began to fall harder, mingling with the neon haze, the two stood at the precipice of a battle that would decide not just the fate of the city, but the fragile boundary between self and shadow itself. The night stretched on, thick with tension and dread. Somewhere in the murky depths of the city, Umbra's plans moved forward, unstoppable, or so it seemed. But Elias and Mira, bound by trust forged in darkness, prepared to strike back, even as the shadows whispered promises of chaos and control. With every moment, the city's heartbeat quickened, echoing the dangerous game unfolding in the shadows. The line between hunter and hunted blurred anew, and the question remained, could they stop the weaponization before the city was consumed entirely? The answer lay buried deep within Umbra's web, waiting to be unraveled. The laboratory was a cavern of shadows and flickering neon, a dissonant symphony of light and gloom that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Elias Kade stepped cautiously across the cracked linoleum floor, his trench coat trailing like a dark shroud behind him. The air was thick with the acrid tang of ozone and burnt circuits, punctuated by the low hum of machines whose purposes eluded him, but whose presence was undeniably ominous. At the center of this chaos stood Judah Leonard Huxley, disheveled and restless, his eyes scanning a holographic projection that danced in the air between them. Jagged shadows wove through the data streams, fractured, autonomous shapes that flickered and writhed with unsettling intent. Elias's gaze locked onto those spectral patterns, a cold knot tightening in his chest. "You wanted answers," Huxley said, his voice a brittle rasp that barely concealed the manic edge beneath. "Here they are. Shadows don't just detach, Elias. They re-engineered, birthed from manipulation, from tampering with the very essence of identity. Umbra didn't stumble upon this chaos by accident. They created it." Elias's brow furrowed, disbelief warring with grim acceptance. The Umbra network, the shadowy cable he had hunted through rain-soaked alleys and neon nightmares, was not just exploiting a natural phenomenon. They were its architects. The implications were staggering. If shadows could be engineered, controlled, weaponized, then the city's descent into madness was no accident but a calculated coup. Huxley's fingers danced over the hologram, isolating clusters of shadow movements linked to experimental energy signatures. Years ago, experiments began on the fringes of quantum manipulation and neuropsychic resonance. The goal was to sever the shadow from the self, to create an autonomous entity that could act without the constraints of human morality or law. The words hung heavy in the stale air. Elias swallowed hard, the weight of the revelation pressing down like the suffocating haze outside. So, my shadow, it's a weapon. In a manner of speaking, Huxley admitted, eyes flickering with a mix of pride and regret. But it's more than that. Shadows are extensions of the psyche, repositories of subconscious will and fear. When severed, they become mirrors distorted, fractured reflections of the soul. Umbra harnesses that fracture. A sudden flicker plunged the room into near darkness. The neon strips sputtering as shadows within the lab writhed unnaturally against the walls. Elias's heart slammed against his ribs, breath hitching as the room seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. The boundary between light and shadow blurred, and for a moment, the darkness felt sentient, watching, waiting. Huxley's voice cut through the chaos, calm yet edged with urgency. The experiment's success is also its curse. The more detached the shadow becomes, the more it erodes the host's identity. Reclaiming it isn't just a matter of control, it's a matter of survival. Elias's eyes drifted to a cracked mirror leaning against a wall, its fractured surface reflecting his worried face back at him. The reflection was fragmented, a mosaic of light and shadow that seemed less and less like him with every passing day. You must understand, Huxley continued, stepping closer, that what you seek could cost you everything you are. Umbra's ambition isn't merely chaos. It's transformation of the city and of the self. A silence settled between them, heavy and suffocating. Elias's fingers clenched into fists beneath his coat. The path ahead was littered with shadows, both literal and metaphorical. Each step toward reclaiming his stolen self risked shattering what remained. "Then I have no choice," Elias finally said, voice low but resolute. "If I don't confront this, if I don't understand it fully, the city and I will be lost to the darkness." Huxley's gaze softened, a fleeting glimpse of something almost human piercing the veil of madness. "Very well, detective. But remember, sometimes the mirror doesn't just show who you are. It shows who you might become." As Elias turned to leave, the holographic shadows flickered once more, their cryptic dance a haunting prelude to the battles yet to come. Outside, the city pulsed with neon lights and whispered fears, waiting for the storm to break. And within that storm, Elias Kade would have to confront the fractured reflections of his own soul, or be consumed entirely.